The colony that disappeared. Imagine arriving on an isolated island more than 400 years ago. No roads, no telephones, no way to contact the outside world. You build homes, you plant crops, you have families, and then one day the person who was supposed to bring you supplies leaves. You wait, 1 year passes, then another, and when someone finally returns, the entire settlement is empty. No bodies, no battle, no clear explanation, only a single word carved into wood. CROATOAN. This is not a modern mystery. It happened in the year 1590 on an island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. More than 100 English colonists had been left behind at Roanoke. When their governor finally returned after 3 years, they were gone. Their homes had disappeared into the wilderness, their possessions were largely missing, and the people themselves were nowhere to be found. This is the true story of the lost colony of Roanoke. England's New World. In the late 16th century, England was competing with other European powers for influence in the New World. Queen Elizabeth I supported English efforts to establish colonies across the Atlantic. One of the men given permission to establish an English colony was Sir Walter Raleigh. In 1585, an English expedition established a settlement on Roanoke Island, located along the coast of present-day North Carolina. But creating a permanent settlement was incredibly difficult. The colonists had to survive in an unfamiliar environment. They needed food, they needed shelter, and they needed good relationships with the indigenous peoples already living in the region. The first settlement struggled. Eventually, the colonists abandoned it and returned to England, but England did not give up. A second attempt would become much more famous. In 1587, another group of English settlers sailed toward Roanoke. This time, families were among the colonists: men, women, children. They were not simply soldiers or explorers. They were people hoping to build a permanent community. The expedition was led by John White, and among the settlers was White's pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare. On August 18, 1587, something remarkable happened. Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. Her name was Virginia Dare. She became the first child of English parents known to have been born in the English colony in the territory that would later become the United States. For a brief moment, Roanoke represented hope. A new English community was beginning. But there was a serious problem. The colonists needed supplies, and the war between England and Spain was becoming increasingly dangerous. John White made the difficult decision to return to England. He promised to come back. He had no idea how long it would take. John White sailed away. Behind him remained more than 100 colonists, his daughter, his granddaughter. Families who had crossed the Atlantic expecting to build a new life. But almost immediately, circumstances changed. England was preparing for war with Spain. The Spanish Armada threatened England. Ships and resources were needed for the conflict. White could not simply return to Roanoke whenever he wanted. The colonists were left waiting. Months passed, then more months, and eventually, years. Think about what that meant. The people on Roanoke had no way of knowing when help would arrive. Their supplies were limited, their future was uncertain, and the settlement was thousands of miles from England. They had to survive without knowing whether John White would ever return. John White desperately wanted to return. But the war with Spain made transportation difficult. His return journey was delayed. He remained in England while the Roanoke colonists waited across the Atlantic. For 3 years, White could do almost nothing. Then finally, in 1590, he was able to join an expedition sailing toward Roanoke. For White, this must have been an emotional journey. He had left his daughter, his granddaughter, his friends. He had promised to return. Now, after years of uncertainty, he was finally going home. But when the ships reached the area around Roanoke Island, something was wrong. There was no welcoming party, no colonists running toward the shore, no smoke rising from the settlement, no obvious sign of life. The colony was silent. John White and the other men searched the abandoned settlement. What they discovered was shocking. The colonists were gone. The houses had been taken apart or abandoned. There were no obvious signs of a massacre. There were no bodies. There was no large battlefield. Instead, they found a clue. Carved into a tree was a single word, CROATOAN. White remembered that CROATOAN was the name of an island and a nearby indigenous community. There was something else. The colonists had previously agreed that if they were forced to leave the settlement, they would carve the name of their destination into a tree, and if they were in danger, they were supposed to carve a special symbol beside it. White did not find the expected distress symbol. That detail became incredibly important. It suggested that the colonists may have left voluntarily. But where did they go? White desperately wanted to investigate. If the colonists had moved to CROATOAN, perhaps they could still be found. But the weather was becoming dangerous. The expedition ships could not remain in the area indefinitely. White eventually had to leave. He never found his daughter, he never found his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, and he never discovered what had happened to the rest of the settlers. For the rest of his life, John White carried the mystery with him. The colony had disappeared, and the people who knew the truth were gone. Over the centuries, historians and researchers have proposed several possibilities. One theory is that the colonists joined or lived among nearby indigenous communities. The word CROATOAN is one reason this theory has received so much attention. Another possibility is that the settlers moved inland to search for better farmland and resources. Some researchers have suggested that groups of colonists may have separated and gone to different locations. There have also been theories about violence or conflict, but there is a problem with all of these explanations. There is not enough evidence to prove exactly what happened. No confirmed burial site has been found containing the entire colony. No document written by the missing settlers explaining their fate has been discovered, and no single archaeological discovery has definitively solved the mystery. The truth may be much more complicated than one simple explanation. The colonists may have moved. They may have divided into groups. They may have joined indigenous communities. Some may have died from disease, hunger, or conflict. Or several of these things may have happened at the same time. We simply don't know. Perhaps the most haunting part of the story is the fate of Virginia Dare. She was born at Roanoke. She was the first child of English parents known to have been born in the colony, but she disappeared along with the rest. No confirmed record tells us where she lived. No confirmed record tells us when she died. For centuries, her story has become part of American mythology. She represents something larger than one missing child. She represents an entire generation whose lives vanished from the historical record. Somewhere in the American landscape, the colonists may have continued living. They may have built new homes. They may have raised children. They may have become part of communities that already existed, or they may have died without leaving enough evidence for us to discover their final days. The colony that never came home. More than 4 centuries have passed since John White returned to Roanoke and found the settlement empty. The word CROATOAN remains one of the most famous clues in American history, but it is not an answer. It is only a clue. The fate of the Roanoke colonists remains unresolved, and perhaps that's what makes the story so powerful. These were not fictional characters. They were real people. They crossed an ocean believing they were building a future. They brought families with them. They built homes. They had children. They dreamed of a new life. And then they disappeared from the historical record. Today, the forests and marshes of coastal North Carolina have changed dramatically. Centuries have passed. The settlement they built is gone. But the question remains. Where did the lost colony of Roanoke go? Did they join another community? Did they move inland? Did they separate and disappear into different parts of the colony? Or did something far more tragic happen? We may never know. But somewhere beneath the soil, beneath the trees, or perhaps within records that have not yet been discovered, there may still be an answer. Until that evidence is found, Roanoke remains one of America's oldest mysteries. A colony vanished, a word was left behind, and more than 400 years later, we are still searching for the people who never came home.